This story is an epic 4-part saga of a psycho Karen. Get ready. Entitled family loses their private club membership and gets banned from the property. For context, I've been working at a resort restaurant for almost 4 years that also operates as a private club for members. As you'd probably expect, most, if not all, of our members are very rich people who usually either own or manage some major successful business or inherited money from a family member. Despite their privilege, however, it hasn't stopped these people from being kind and respectful towards the staff and guests. They're honestly really sweet people most of the time, and only ever act entitled when they feel they haven't been given the basic treatment expected for any guest at our hotel. Even the owner himself, who visits every so often, doesn't ask for anything outrageous if he knows he can't get it from us. That doesn't mean entitled types aren't uncommon, but even still, their behavior doesn't last long. They can demand a manager all they want, but a manager can still say no and get away with it. This is because no matter how much they scream or cry, throw their money or titles around, or act like a jerk, our resort still puts the happiness of their staff over money. As the HR rep at my recent annual training said, no matter how important our members are or how much money they spend, that doesn't give them the right to treat others badly or act like they're better than those around them. We have no tolerance for that. So pull up a chair and get your popcorn, because I'm about to tell you the 3-part story about how a family of 3, a daughter, a mother, and a father, had their memberships completely revoked and their faces plastered on the "Do Not Serve" signs because they decided to throw a fit and threaten staff, managers, and eventually even one of the big bosses himself. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The daughter gets fired. This story started when a new girl, Heather, was hired to work as a waitress at the sports bar. Heather had known about the job through her parents, Mrs. Karen and Mr. Kevin, who were both members at our resort. Hiring children of members actually isn't uncommon, since whenever the parents needed their child to get a job, they'd automatically consider the resort due to their connections. However, you don't get any extra perks for being both a member and employee here. One night, when Heather was working, the bar got hit really hard, and it was an all-hands-on-deck kind of situation. So imagine the surprise when a frantic waitress ran across the table where Mrs. Karen, Mr. Kevin, and Heather were all sitting. Heather was happily laughing with her parents, eating food and drinking a cocktail, a massive no-no, by the way, for a multitude of reasons, and generally just slacking off. The employee walks up and says to Heather, "Hey, what are you doing? You're supposed to be working. I need your help here." Heather brushes the employee off and says, "I can't. I'm spending time with my parents right now." The employee responds, "You can't do this. We're in the middle of a shift. Please help me." Heather repeats her refusal. "Leave me alone. I'll work when my parents are gone." Her parents didn't say much as far as I can remember. So the employee, red-faced, did what any other person would do in this situation and told one of the managers, who was furious. When the manager approached the table, she was even angrier. Maybe it was the cocktail her employee was holding or the fact that Heather had misbehaved before, but the manager fired Heather that night and sent her home. I can't remember whether the parents were there or not at that moment, but I recall being told that once or twice they called to complain how it was unfair their child was fired because insert reason here. However, it wouldn't be the last time they intervened. Chapter 2. Mrs. Karen gets dragged out of the bar by security. About a week had passed since Heather was fired, and it's just a normal day for the sports bar. As typical, the employees just started arriving for work and started preparing the bar and the restaurant area for the guest who'd be arriving in an hour. Among those employees was the manager for that day, who I'll call Alice. Alice was actually one of the main managers of the sports bar and was very good at her job. I'd worked with her once before, and she's one of the kindest and most loving ladies you'd ever have the pleasure of working with. She was helping the employees with their duties when the doors to the bar opened unexpectedly. A guest coming into the bar before opening wasn't uncommon, but this wasn't any normal person. It was a very, very angry Mrs. Karen, who immediately, upon entering the bar, started screaming at the staff. My daughter has COVID and now she's sick. I bet she got it from one of you, didn't she? I can't believe you monsters would do that to her. You got her fired and then you get her sick. Don't you know who I am?" For the record, this happened in mid to late 2020 when COVID-19 was still a big issue. Masks were mandatory for businesses and vaccines weren't even available to the public yet. The staff immediately stopped what they were doing and started watching. Keep in mind, this sports bar was actually one big massive room, so everyone there could see and hear everything. Alice tried to approach Miss Karen and asked her to calm down and to leave because they weren't open yet. However, Mrs. Karen kept screaming and making a major scene out of everything. Alice shifted to a more strict tone, insisting that Mrs. Karen leave or she'd get security involved. That's when Mrs. Karen noticed something behind Alice. One of the employees had gotten their phone out and started recording everything that was happening. I mean, obviously, someone would do that in this day and age, right? Mrs. Karen was furious and turned her anger onto the employee. She ran up to them and smacked their phone so hard it flew out of their hands and then proceeded to scream at them even louder than before. "Oh, that would be assault, ma'am." Alice immediately called security, who came to the bar almost immediately. Mrs. Karen had to be physically dragged out of the building by two very large security guards as she screamed every possible thing an entitled person could say. As you'd expect from a situation like this, an incident report had to be filed, and since Mrs. Karen was a member of the resort, her and Mr. Kevin's membership was temporarily suspended pending investigation. Security even had to print posters with Mrs. Karen's face on it, saying to keep watch and under no circumstances serve her or even her husband until further notice. And then it got worse. Chapter 3. Mr. Kevin threatens the general manager and loses his membership permanently. The time frame between Mrs. Karen's freakout and this wasn't ever told to me, but I remember it happened so soon after the original posters with Mrs. Karen on them hadn't even been taken down yet. Needless to say, Mr. Kevin, who was the primary holder of the family's membership, was furious about what happened. But what do you think he'd do? Did he try to reach out calmly and apologize? Did he wait a little for the dust to settle before repairing things? Did you even read or listen to the chapter's title? Most employees actually know where most of the major managers' offices are and know how to find them. While this was never taught to me when I first trained, I believe it's probably just a cautionary thing. One of the major managers, our resort's general director, had his office located in the main building and, as you'd guess, has power over various departments. As you'd expect, his name is everywhere, including major emails the members would get about newsletters and things like that. Everyone knew this man. They knew his face, knew his position, and knew what he did. On that fateful day, Mr. Kevin arrives at the resort and immediately started asking employees where he could find the general director. Some naive fool who probably had no idea of anything going on gave him the answer and told him where he could find the general director. Honestly, no idea why this employee gave the answer so willingly, and maybe I'll never know, but Mr. Kevin charged to the office. Mr. General Director was quietly sitting at his desk in his office when Mr. Kevin threw open the doors and, without hesitating, unloaded all of his fury upon the man. Mr. General Director, a man who I'd never seen angry or raise his voice, immediately told Mr. Kevin that he shouldn't be yelling at him and that he will get security involved. But, say it with me, Mr. Karen didn't stop. He, instead, kept insisting his membership be reinstated, that his wife be let back onto the resort, that this was all ridiculous, and that he spends thousands on us and that we should apologize. After all, it wasn't his fault. But Mr. General Director was not amused. Of course, he was aware of the situation with Mr. Kevin's family and the membership status, but his hands were tied, and what Mr. Kevin was doing at that moment wasn't exactly going to help him. I mean, would you help a man who just barged into your office unannounced and started screaming at you almost immediately? Just like his wife, security was called and Mr. Kevin was dragged out of the office and thrown off a property. I even think police got involved, but I can't remember for sure. What I do remember is this being the final straw for Mr. Kevin and his family. And courtesy of Mr. General Director, Mr. Kevin's entire family not only had their membership terminated, but they were even banned from the property. Well, what would you expect to happen? Play with fire, prepare to get burned, right? Chapter 4, Epilogue. I remember first learning about this story when I saw the posters for myself. Imagine a piece of paper with a family picture of Mr. Kevin and Mrs. Karen hung on the wall of security's office with these fine words written. Mr. Kevin and Mrs. Karen's membership has been suspended, no, terminated due to their poor treatment of staff and guests on our property. If you see these two anywhere on the property or at sports bar, do not serve them and immediately call security. Thank you. The poster stayed on that wall for almost 2 months. I'd often talk to some of the officers at security. I would visit them a lot before I started work for the day during the summer, and they never saw or heard from them again. As my coworker finished the story, she laughed loudly and said, "Those nutcases had it coming. Good riddance." And as far as I know, none of them were ever heard from again. I agree. Don't be an entitled jerk. Did you not think this story was crazy? Not only 3 and 4 parts of it when one part alone was insane. Wow, how would have you handled this? The fallout in this story is extreme. You're gonna love it.
One heck of an omelet, posted by Bellrocks. We all know this saying, in order to make an omelet, you gotta crack a few eggs. A very down-to-earth saying with a lot of meaning and truth behind it. I guess you can even apply this saying to revenge in some cases, particularly my story of revenge. A story of revenge so great that it might be one of the best cases of revenge so far in the year 2016, or at least I tell myself that. In the end, unfortunately, there was some collateral damage, but hey, you know the saying. I'm a former Marine living in a semi-small town that I'm not from, trying to make ends meet while I wait for my tech school to start this summer. I've been out of the Marines for a few years now, and after partying day in and day out and making ends meet by bartending at various bars around my state, I've finally convinced myself that it's time to stop being a man-child and work toward a stable career. Hence, I've enrolled myself into tech school. In the meantime, I figured I could squeeze as much as I can out of the service industry until I complete school and graduate. Well, that was the plan, and it still is, but not at the restaurant or bar that I thought it would be. I moved to this town from another state with my girlfriend due to a tragedy in her family. After living off savings for a few months, I decided to snag a job to make things easier to stay afloat. I ended up at a quaint little restaurant very close to where my girlfriend worked. A restaurant recently reopened by its corporate ownership after a terrible franchise owner had control of it. All of the staff were new hires from the top to the bottom. The restaurant was now full service as opposed to ordering at a counter. It had a beautiful mahogany bar that meshed well with the theme of the restaurant that was sectioned off from the dining side of it. Great food and even better drink specials, the perfect place for me to make ends meet while I attend school. It was convenient in so many ways. My girlfriend and I could save gas by driving in one vehicle when our schedules matched. She could come eat lunch or dinner on her break and get a discount on food. Things just seemed perfect. When I first started working at this restaurant, management seemed to really like having me around. I was very good at entertaining guests. I brought people into the bar and I was great at making drinks. One night stands out the most. I had a couple walk into the restaurant minutes from closing. Often when this happens, you'll get a server who is upset that they have to do their job a little longer, and that will reflect on their service. Not me, it's their money, and we're still technically open 10 minutes until we close, so I'm going to treat these guests just like I would any other guest. The couple clearly had a great night and left me a very big tip. The next day, I was shown an email that was sent to corporate with nothing but praises about my service and attitude. I assumed it was from the same couple, but who knows? After that incident, the atmosphere and management's attitude toward me seemed to negatively shift. Before we get into that though, let's discuss the management team. First, we have the GM, the general manager. Let's call him Jack. Jack is a round man in his early 30s who, on the surface, seems like a stand-up guy. You'd think he'd have your back until the bitter end when you first meet him. Then we have Nessa, the assistant GM. Nessa is a short woman in her late 40s, and my first impressions was that she is a quiet but professional woman, does things by the book. And finally, we have Courtney. Courtney was the, quote, bar manager, and I'll explain these quotations a little further in the story, and from the get-go, Courtney rubbed me the wrong way. Courtney was in her late 30s and never really smiled. Something about her just seemed dishonest. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. Oh, and I should also mention Kara. Kara was a woman about 29 years old, and she was best friends with Jack, the GM. She was the other bartender for the restaurant that would work shifts that I didn't work. In the end, I had nothing but great things to say about Kara, and I didn't want things to end the way they did, but hey, you know the saying. Now back to the story. After receiving the positive review, I noticed I would get flack from both Nessa and Courtney for little things. They would reprimand me in rude ways without any tact. One night, Nessa, out of nowhere, told me I was arrogant. Of course, I defended myself, and this caused a dispute that ended up with both of us apologizing. I still have no idea what I was apologizing for, but hey, I just wanted a peaceful end to the matter. Another day, Courtney pulled me aside as I came in for my shift and told me that the guest had told her that I was giving them free drinks. She tried to get me to fess up to this, and I vehemently denied the claims. I even told her to check the cameras, or I'll have Jack check the cameras. I never, ever stole from the bar or gave people free drinks. Then, there was that time that I came in for a shift, and Courtney immediately jumped down my throat for leaving the tables a mess. Later, it was proven to be a lie, before leaving the bar after closing. She says this as she walks out the door from her morning shift, leaving 3 tables unbussed. It was like something out of a comedy sketch. Another thing that may have struck you as odd, Courtney, the bar manager, was scheduling herself bar shifts while getting management pay. Odd, right? My theory on this sudden change of attitude toward me from the management is that may not have been so sudden after all. I don't think Courtney liked me from the start. I remember one time when I was training, I had to make an easy drink for a guest because she didn't know how to make it. She put pineapple juice in a Long Island iced tea. Yuck. This was probably embarrassing for her, and I remember the guest making a comment along the lines of, "Maybe he should be the bar manager, ha," said in jest, but I could tell that it really upset Courtney. I was also told by another employee that during a busy night over the holidays, Courtney told Nessa and Jack that she thought I was stealing from the bar. I can't verify these claims, but after the conclusion of everything that happened, I wouldn't put it past Courtney. This negative stigma towards me most likely rubbed off on Jack because, surely enough, his attitude toward me changed. I started to feel held hostage and regretted going to work. I felt as though my stature was being diminished behind my back, my reputation was being tarnished, and I was sinking in quicksand and had no way of defending myself when all of these claims were made behind my back. One shift, my girlfriend was on her lunch break, and while I was in the back getting side work done, Jack had made a rude comment to her or was very rude to her. She wasn't clear when she told me about it later that night, but she didn't feel comfortable going back in there. Her feelings were hurt. I confronted Jack about this, and he just brushed it off and quickly changed the subject by telling me to find something to do. All of this hate would soon hit a boiling point, and that's where the omelet comes in. A little over a week ago, I was enjoying a night off. Me and the girlfriend watched some Making a Murderer, which is ironically relevant to the story, before both drifting off to sleep. I woke up bright and early the next day, did some laundry, and got some cleaning done while my girlfriend slept in. She works 2 jobs and deserves it. I took a shower and prepared to head into work, hopefully making some good tips. I walk in 5 minutes early, and the managers are all at a table outside of the bar talking. They see me walk in and sat me down. They told me that the night before, someone had served a minor some drinks, and it got reported to the police somehow. Shoo, wasn't me, I thought. Well, I didn't even go to work that night, and hey, I always ID people that I'm unsure of. They told me that I need to be sure to always ID people, and I assured them that I do. Both Jack and Nessa walked off to the dining side. I talked with Courtney a bit, and the conversation was a bit odd. She said, yeah, we need to be sure to ID people, and you probably just assumed he was 21. I cut her off and told her that it wasn't me who worked last night. She stuttered back, oh, I meant Kara. Yeah, it was Kara who messed up. Kara, who I really loved working with, but who was also best friends with Jack. So you can assume how things were taken care of. This would have immediately been my termination if it were me in Kara's shoes. I didn't hold any grudge. I was glad she kept her job. After the doors were locked that night, Nessa came up to me and brought up the underage incident. Again, it was odd. She spoke kind of loud but not rudely and told me that I need to be sure and ID people from now on so that this doesn't happen again. I stood my ground, and I told her that, with all due respect, it was not me who served the kid. She said, look, I know, I'm just saying. What were they trying to pull here? I had the next day off, chilling in my apartment all by myself, playing Hearthstone, eating like a pig, when my phone buzzes. It was a notification telling me that I need to come into work an hour early because the managers were having a meeting. No sweat, more hours, more money. I continued doing my thing, and the next day I go in an hour early as instructed. Once again, the managers are sitting at a table near the bar. They all stare at me as I walk in, and things didn't seem right. Jack tells me that he needs to talk to me. Jack and Nessa both sit me down in the dining area, and Jack tells me that he heard that I had a dispute with Nessa a few weeks back, and he can't have that attitude around here. He tells me that he is letting me go. I was shocked. I told him that me and Nessa already hashed out our differences, and this happened weeks ago. I look over at Nessa, and she shoots me a smirk. Well, now you're talking to your GM about it. I felt the Marine in me start to come out. I was getting angry and about to do something stupid. It took everything in me not to throw the table over and punch Jack right in the jaw. I took a deep breath, stood up, told them good to go, and walked out. And Courtney was sure to give me a sarcastic bye as I walked out the door. What the heck just happened? This was weeks ago and they are firing me for this? This can't be right. I get to my car and slam my hands down on the steering wheel. I was so angry. I just wanted to call my girlfriend and hear her tell me that everything was going to be all right. I grab my phone and find her name in my contacts, and I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to break the news? Hey babe, they fired me for no reason. Jack is such a prick. Kara served someone underage and nothing came of that, but they fired me for something that happened weeks ago. I didn't hit the call button. I put my phone down, and then it hit me all at once. These jerks were trying to burn me for what Kara did. Since it got reported to the police, somebody needed to pay, and it sure as heck wasn't going to be Kara. I peeled out as I left the parking lot, not because I was angry, but because I needed to act fast. If I didn't act fast, they would get away with murder. Most of the people who join the Marines join to fight, and as crazy as this sounds, this is largely why people enlist in the infantry side of the Marines. People like us have a desire to fight, and the Marines is a great outlet. Most Marines love fighting, and most of us love conflict. We thrive off of it, and we know how to react when the cards aren't in our favor. We are generally some of the nicest and most loyal people you will ever meet, but you don't mess with a U.S. Marine. I open my door and rush to grab my laptop. My girlfriend asks me what's wrong, and I quickly say, nothing, babe, got fired, love you. I grab my laptop and sit on my recliner. She says, what? I just motion with my hands 1 second as I load up Google. I find the restaurant's corporate website, and it didn't have a number for corporate, but it did have the email address of every single franchise in the company. Even better, I thought to myself. So I wrote a long email to a franchise, copied and pasted it to every other one. I explained in detail about the favoritism that was happening with Jack and Kara. I explained how Kara had served someone underage, and I had the feelings that they were trying to pin it on me. I explained how Courtney would get manager pay while taking tips as a bartender. I explained how Nessa would occasionally have me make a drink, and she would give it to her teenage daughter, who also worked at the restaurant. I provided times, dates, and even showed them the email that I'd sent to our state's alcohol control about the underage drinking incidents to ensure that my hands were clean. I explained how an expensive bottle of Jack Daniel's Sinatra seemed to have a leak in it nights after Jack had worked. Every bit of dirt that I ever saw or heard about, I put in that email, and I let every franchise in the company know about it. I demanded that I get a call back, and I also demanded that I get my termination papers to make sure I wasn't being framed. I typed so fast, and things just seemed to melt into place as I made the email. My fingers were my weapon, and you don't F with a Marine. My girlfriend is staring at me the entire time. What the heck is going on? I finished the email and explained to her the situation. She asked me if I'm afraid others will get into trouble, and I tell her, well, you know the saying. I fill out applications, and the same day I get a call from a very well-known and popular restaurant. They want me to come in for an interview the next day. Perfect, I already have another job. I didn't hear from corporate at all that day, and it was very late in the afternoon, so I expected as much. The next day, I get a phone call early in the morning. It's corporate HR that owns the restaurant I worked at. She tells me that they are on their way to the restaurant to investigate my claims. She asked me a bunch of questions. I'm guessing that I was being recorded. I stayed consistent and honest. She tells me all of the things that I mentioned in the email were 100% against company policy, but the claims would have to be investigated before any action was taken. I asked her if they have access to the camera feed, and she assured me that they did. Oh, thank God for cameras. She told me to call back immediately if I could remember anything else that was going on. We hung up, and I got dressed and headed out the door for my interview at my new potential job. Well, the interview couldn't have gone any better. I met most of the management at this team, and I got such an amazing vibe from them. They even want to cross-train me as a bartender almost immediately. Most of the time, this place only promotes from within, so they really must have liked me. So I got the job, and I'm going to try my hardest to be a great employee. Anyways, back to my revenge story. I later got word from an insider that they indeed did try to pin the underage incident on me. Little did they know. I'm lying in bed that same night, drifting off into sleep listening to some of Sam Harris's podcast. My girlfriend is sitting up in the bed browsing Facebook. All of a sudden, she gasps. She startled me because I was almost asleep. I jump up and ask her what's wrong. She shows me her phone. Wow, I say calmly. I guess things were worse off there than I thought, but dang, I didn't expect things to get taken that far. Well, you don't F with the Marine, I thought. I got out of bed and made some sweet tea. Do you feel bad? The girlfriend asked. Well, babe, you know the saying. If you look right here on the screen, or if you're driving, don't look. This is a Facebook post that OP made with everything censored, showing that the restaurant did in fact get shut down completely.
Karen neighbor destroys my property and then calls the cops on me. I'm innocent. Click the video on your screen so you hear how this ends, and I'll see you there.